There are files the Soviet state never wanted you to read. There are testimonies that were burned twice, once in paper, once in memory. And there is a date, a time, a number that appears again and again across dozens of classified documents, witness statements, and sealed medical records. 247, not 246, not 248, always the same, always exact, always in connection with a single man, a single death, a single night that, according to everything hidden from history, may not have been a death at all. This is not a fairy tale. This is not science fiction. What you are about to hear is a reconstruction built from fragments, from the testimonies of guards who were silenced, doctors who were scattered, and archivists who paid a price for their curiosity. The evidence has been pieced together over decades by independent researchers, historians working outside state institutions, and a small number of former intelligence officers who, in their final years, chose to speak. The question is not whether Joseph Stalin died on the 5th of March, 1953. The question is, what exactly happened in that bedroom, and what did they find on the table in the morgue? The 5th of March, 1953 began like every other night at the Kuntsevo dacha, the so-called near dacha, Stalin's preferred residence outside Moscow. The compound was sealed. The perimeter guards were in position. The interior guards rotated on a schedule so precise it had not varied in years. Nothing was permitted to be unusual. Nothing was permitted to be out of order. At 2:47 in the morning, a guard stationed outside the private sleeping quarters, a career security officer referred to in internal MGB records only as Sorokin, reported hearing something he could not explain. Not a cry, not a struggle, not the sound of a man in distress. What he heard, according to his testimony recorded 3 weeks later and subsequently classified for 39 years, was a whisper. Not Russian, not Georgian, not any language he had encountered in 22 years of service. A whispering voice, low and rhythmic, that seemed to come from inside the locked room and from everywhere at once. Sorokin did not open the door. Protocol did not permit it. He noted the time, 2:47, in the duty log and continued his watch. The official record states that Stalin was found unresponsive at approximately 6 in the morning and that death was subsequently registered at 6:20. This creates a gap, 3 hours and 33 minutes between the moment of the whisper and the moment of official discovery. 3 hours and 33 minutes during which no one entered that room. 3 hours and 33 minutes of institutional silence. But here's the detail that researchers have returned to again and again. Every clock in that bedroom had stopped, all of them. The wall clock above the writing desk, the small clock on the nightstand, the decorative mantel clock brought from the Georgian residence in 1941. Each one had stopped at the same moment, 2:47, as if time itself had decided to step back from whatever was happening in that room. 3 hours and 33 minutes is not a medical gap. It is not an administrative oversight. It is a number that, once noticed, cannot be unnoticed. When the first personnel entered the bedroom that morning, they reported an atmosphere that defied rational explanation. The air carried a distinct smell, sharp, chemical, sulfurous, layered beneath something electrical. The dry metallic smell of ozone, the kind of smell left after a lightning strike. The windows were sealed. There was no storm. There had been no storm for 4 days. And on the far wall facing the bed, a large mirror inherited from the pre-revolutionary furnishings of the dacha. It had cracked, not shattered, not broken, but cracked, perfectly down the center from top to bottom in an absolutely straight vertical line. No impact point, no spiderweb fracture pattern, just a clean, geometrically precise division as if the mirror had been scored by a tool. No one in the building reported hearing a sound during the night that could have caused it. A junior medical orderly named Grigoriev was among the first non-security personnel to enter the room. He was a composed man by all accounts, a former military medic with service on the Eastern Front. According to colleagues, he had seen things that would break a civilian mind. He entered the bedroom that morning and he did not speak for 4 days. On the 5th day, He wrote a note, a single sentence handed to a colleague before he was taken to a secure psychiatric facility at the order of the MGB. The note was preserved by that colleague and has since circulated among researchers. It read, "It came out of the mirror." Grigoriev was never released from state psychiatric care. The official record describes his condition as acute psychotic episode of endogenous origin. His family was told he had died in 1958 from natural causes. No grave has been confirmed. Within hours, the compound was locked down with a completeness that went beyond ordinary security protocol. Colonel Lavrentiev, a senior MGB officer and close associate of Beria's inner circle, arrived before noon and personally oversaw the sealing of the death chamber. Every item inside the bedroom was cataloged, bagged, and removed to an undisclosed facility. Every item except the furniture, which was too large to move without attracting attention from the household staff. The room was then locked, sealed with wax impressions, and placed under a continuous guard rotation. All of this was standard procedure following a high-level death. What was not standard? For 5 days, the lights in that room could not be turned on. Electricians were called. They found no fault with the wiring. They replaced the bulbs. The switches clicked normally. There was current, but no light came. Security personnel shining torches into the room from the doorway reported that the beam seemed to diffuse and dim before reaching the far wall, as if the air itself was absorbing the light. On the 6th day, at exactly 2:47 in the afternoon, the lights came on by themselves. A guard standing at the door watched them flicker on, steady, bright, as if nothing had ever been wrong. He noted the time. When Lavrentiev was informed, he did not speak for a long moment. Then he said, "Noted. Tell no one." The guard's testimony, recorded years later as part of an informal historical project by a retired Soviet academic, confirms both the time and the colonel's reaction. A second witness carries even more weight, not because his account is more dramatic, but because it is more specific. Captain Morozov, a security officer who had served at the Kuntsevo compound for 6 years, was conducting an exterior patrol 2 nights after the death. At 2:47 in the morning, the time is noted in his written account with an emphasis that suggests he was aware of its significance. He looked up at the window of the sealed bedroom and saw something. He described it in his testimony as a red pulsing light, rhythmic and slow, visible through the heavy curtains. Not a torch, not a reflection. A light that pulsed with the regularity of a heartbeat. And in front of it, or perhaps within it, he saw a silhouette, the shape of a figure, except that the figure possessed what he described in clinical military language as surplus anatomical features. More limbs than a human body should have, arranged in a configuration he could not reconcile with any living form he had ever encountered. Morozov filed a formal report. His report was immediately classified at the highest level. Within a week, he had been transferred to a posting in a remote eastern district, a posting so obscure that researchers tracking his subsequent career have found only 3 further references to him in any accessible archive, the last dated 1957. The autopsy was ordered by Lavrenti Beria with a speed that, in retrospect, seems less like administrative urgency and more like controlled panic. The procedure was scheduled for the 7th of March, 1953, less than 48 hours after the official time of death. Beria's instructions, relayed through intermediaries, contained a phrase that stopped several of the receiving officials cold. He called for ritual precautionary measures in addition to standard medical protocol. The phrase does not appear in any other Soviet medical or security document from this era. No one who received it asked for clarification. No one recorded what was meant. But what was assembled in that autopsy room suggests that someone somewhere understood exactly what was intended. The commission was composed of 13 doctors, a number that, in the context of Soviet state medicine, has no rational administrative explanation. Medical commissions of this type typically numbered 5, 7, or 9. 13 is, under any interpretive framework, an irregular choice. Furthermore, every physician selected had been pre-screened and verified as a committed atheist, not simply non-religious, but actively, documentably atheist. This criterion was explicitly stated in the selection brief. In the examination room alongside the medical commission stood 8 armed MGB officers. Their presence during a medical procedure was itself highly irregular. But more startling was a third group, 3 defrocked priests, men who had once served the Russian Orthodox Church and had subsequently been stripped of their orders, were brought into the room carrying a single icon. They stood at the far wall and did not speak, but they did not leave, and no one ordered them to. Among the physicians originally assigned was Professor Volkov, one of the most respected pathologists in the Soviet Union. He refused to participate. His refusal was not submitted as a formal objection. It was communicated privately to a colleague, along with an explanation that became infamous in the years that followed. Volkov had experienced a dream, or what he described as something more than a dream. A vivid, overwhelming vision in which he was told in terms he could not dismiss upon waking that the seals are weak and he must not be cut. This language, seals, and the warning against opening them will become relevant again. For now, Volkov removed himself from the commission. 5 days later, he died of cardiac arrest. He was 42 years old. He had no recorded history of heart disease. He had undergone a full physical examination 4 months prior and been certified in excellent health. What happened in that room on the 7th of March 1953 was recorded twice. One record was the official document filed with the state stating a cause of death consistent with hypertensive crisis and cerebral hemorrhage. The second record, compiled simultaneously by the senior physician, contained something entirely different. The procedure began when Dr. Nikolaev, the senior medical officer, made the first incision. The scalpel, a standard surgical instrument, heated on contact with the skin, not gradually, not over time, but immediately, as if brought into contact with a heated surface rather than a human body. Nikolaev received a burn on 2 fingers of his right hand, severe enough to require dressing. He stepped back from the table. At this point, a figure entered the room who had not been part of the original commission briefing. He was introduced to the other physicians only as Starostin, representing laboratory number 7. No one in the room had heard of laboratory number 7. Starostin approached Nikolaev, administered an injection from a vial he carried personally, a vial whose label was in a script none of the physicians could read. And Nikolaev returned to the table without complaint, as if the burn on his hand had ceased to matter. The internal examination revealed a body that did not conform to any established medical understanding of human anatomy. In a state of post-mortem decomposition, the internal organs were a deep violet purple color throughout. Not the discoloration of a body left unattended, not the consequence of toxicological interference, but a systemic, uniform purple that suggested the color had been present in life. The venous system, when exposed, appeared not as the organized network of a healthy circulatory system, but as something chaotic and branching. One physician wrote in his private notes that it looked like the root system of an old tree, growing in directions that anatomy does not predict. The body temperature at the time of examination was recorded as 38.5 degrees Celsius, 31 hours after death, in a room kept cool for preservation. This was not a measurement error. It was checked 3 times with 3 separate instruments by 3 different physicians. Then came the heart. The heart weighed 870 grams. The standard weight of a healthy adult male heart is between 300 and 350 grams. This organ was nearly 3 times the size it should have been, and it was beating, not strongly, not rhythmically, but with a slow, intermittent, detectable pulse, a persistent biological impossible beating, 31 hours after the moment of official death. When the cardiac tissue was opened, the examining physicians found black crystalline formations growing within the muscle, not calcification deposits of the kind associated with certain cardiac pathologies. Crystalline structures, geometric, angular, multifaceted, that had penetrated and integrated themselves throughout the myocardium. and these crystals under the examination lamp emitted a faint red luminescence. The blood, when drawn for sampling, was violet in color, not dark red, not blackened with post-mortem deoxygenation, but violet. And under magnification, the blood cells themselves were found to contain crystalline inclusions, structures embedded within the cellular architecture, as if they had grown there over time, over years. On the surface of the liver, the examining physicians found markings, not surgical markings from any prior procedure, not pathological scarring, markings that appeared to have been burned from the inside outward, as if something within the tissue had generated enough heat to cauterize the organ's surface in precise, deliberate, repeating patterns. The patterns were photographed. The photographs were sealed with the classified protocol. But before sealing, one physician, a man with a background in languages, identified what he saw as ancient Georgian ecclesiastical symbols, specifically symbols associated in the oldest layers of Georgian Orthodox tradition with what is called sealing against departure. Seals placed in that tradition not to keep something out of a body, but to keep something inside one. 2 documents were produced that day. One was the official protocol, which described a standard hypertensive death with unremarkable pathological findings. The other was the true record, every anomaly, every measurement, every photograph. This second document was handed to Barry as representative and destroyed. A typist named Voronova, who had been assigned to transcribe the document, managed to copy 2 pages before it was taken from her. She was arrested within the month. She died in a labor camp in 1957 under circumstances her surviving relatives have never been able to clarify. The medical commission dissolved immediately after the procedure. Its members were dispersed, transferred, and, officially, returned to their ordinary professional lives. But researchers who have tracked the subsequent biographies of all 13 physicians have found a pattern that cannot be attributed to coincidence or the general brutality of Soviet-era life. All 13 doctors died before 1972. The average age at death was 51 years, 17 years after the autopsy. The manner of their deaths defies statistical normality. One drowned in a locked bathtub. The bathroom door had to be broken down. There was no water on the floor, no sign of struggle, no explanation for how the door came to be locked from the inside. One disappeared from a sealed basement of his apartment building. The basement had one entrance. The entrance was padlocked from the outside, and it remained padlocked when neighbors became concerned by his absence. 2 physicians, living in different cities with no contact between them in the years since the autopsy, died of simultaneous cardiac arrest. Investigators, who later cross-referenced the times recorded on both death certificates, found the times identical. 2:47. One death was not recorded as a death at all. A physician who had been a non-smoker, a teetotaler, and a man of fastidious personal habits was found in his apartment in front of the wall beside his bed. The wall bore burned into the plaster and the wallpaper, the perfect silhouette of a human figure in a posture that medical examiners could not reconcile with the position of his body when found. The man himself had suffered a complete neurological collapse and survived. Though he never regained the ability to form coherent speech, he was placed in institutional care and remained there until his death in 1968. The classified protocol had been destroyed. The photographs were sealed. The witnesses were dead or silent. And whatever had been found inside that body, whatever had pulsed in a 3 times enlarged heart, whatever had grown in crystal formations inside human blood, whatever had left burned ecclesiastical seals on the surface of a human liver, had nowhere officially been recorded as existing at all. The file was closed, but closed files have a way of opening. Before they could bury the man, they had to bury what they knew about him. The autopsy records were ash. The photographs were sealed in a facility that to this day has no confirmed address in any declassified Soviet archive. The 13 doctors were dispersed. The witnesses were silent, transferred, institutionalized, or dead. The official version, hypertensive crisis, cerebral hemorrhage, a tired old man whose body simply gave way, was typed, signed, distributed to every major newspaper in the Soviet Union, and broadcast on state radio within hours. But the body still existed, and whatever was inside that body, whatever had made the scalpel heat on contact, whatever had kept a 3 times enlarged heart beating for 31 hours, whatever had grown in crystalline formations inside the blood of a man who had been officially dead for over a day. That body now needed to be prepared for public display. It needed to be embalmed. It needed to be made presentable. And the specialists brought in to do it took one look and stepped back. The Soviet state had, by 1953, developed considerable expertise in long-term preservation of human remains. Lenin's body had been maintained in the mausoleum since 1924, nearly 30 years, through a combination of chemical treatment, controlled atmospheric conditions, and regular intervention by a dedicated team of specialists. The procedure was demanding but understood. For standard preparation, 2 weeks was sufficient. Stalin's embalming took 5 months. The leading specialist in Soviet embalming procedures at the time was a man referred to in institutional records as Vorobyov, a scientist of considerable reputation trained in the methodology developed for Lenin's preservation. He was approached first. He declined. His refusal, unlike Professor Volkov's refusal before the autopsy, was not accompanied by any account of a dream or a vision. It was delivered in a single sentence that has been reported by 2 independent sources who spoke to colleagues of Vorobyov in the years after his death. He said, "Something has already worked on this. It was not us." He was not replaced by a standard medical team. He was replaced by a group operating under the authority of Starostin, the same figure who had appeared at the autopsy from the facility known only as Laboratory Number 7. The team was not identified by name in any accessible record. They worked in a sealed room for 5 months. They worked at night. The chemical compounds they used were logged in a single requisition document that survived in a secondary archive until the early 1980s. The document lists materials sourced from Switzerland, arriving in containers whose external markings were described by the receiving officer, who could not read them, as script of Eastern or Central Asian character, possibly Tibetan. Among the compounds listed were mercury and silver, specified in quantities and concentrations that no known preservation procedure of that era required, combined in proportions that had no established scientific precedent. By night, the building where the preparation was conducted was not silent. Guards stationed at the perimeter reported consistently and independently the same 3 phenomena: the sound of singing in a language none of them could identify, not Russian, not Georgian, not any Soviet language, low, rhythmic, and unbroken for hours at a time. The sound of small bells, a clear, delicate ringing with no identifiable source, and a smell that moved through the sealed walls and into the corridor. The thick, sweet smell of incense layered beneath something sharp and mineral. The same sulfurous undertone that had been present in the death chamber on the 5th of March. No one asked questions. No one filed a complaint. This was 1953, the Soviet Union, and the man who had died was Stalin. You did not ask questions. After 5 months, the body was declared ready. On the 9th of March, 1953, Stalin's body was placed in the Lenin Mausoleum on Red Square, in a glass sarcophagus beside Lenin's. The 2 men, the founder of the Soviet state and the man who had governed it for nearly 3 decades, now lay in the same sealed, climate-controlled chamber, separated by a few meters of cold air and institutional marble. For 8 years they lay there together, and for 8 years, according to accounts that filtered out of the mausoleum's maintenance and security structure, in the decades that followed, something was wrong. The guards reported at first, not all of them, not officially. But in the quiet way that information moves through institutions that punish transparency, word circulated that the night shifts in the mausoleum were not like other night shifts. From the direction of Stalin's sarcophagus, there was a sound. Not loud, not dramatic. A low, periodic sound that the guards described consistently as scratching. The sound of something scraping against a hard interior surface. The sound of something in the language of several witness accounts that were collected informally by a Soviet-era journalist named Kuznetsov, whose work was never published, trying to get out. Guards who reported this formally were reassigned. 2 were committed to psychiatric facilities. The institutional response to these reports was so consistent and so rapid that it functioned in effect as confirmation. Someone in authority was receiving these reports, taking them seriously, and acting to contain them. Meanwhile, the body of Lenin, maintained with extraordinary precision for 30 years, the subject of ongoing scientific intervention by a dedicated team, began for the first time to show signs of unexpected deterioration. The temperature regulation within his sarcophagus, which had functioned without incident for 3 decades, began to behave erratically. The temperature inside Lenin's case was rising, not dramatically, not dangerously, but measurably and inexplicably, despite the cooling systems functioning exactly as they should. Technicians who investigated found no mechanical fault. The cold was present. The heat was coming from somewhere else. The working hypothesis, shared privately among the technical staff but never committed to any official document, was that the source of the thermal anomaly was proximity to the other sarcophagus, to Stalin's body, which, in defiance of every principle of post-mortem biology, appeared to be maintaining a temperature consistent with a living organism. In 1957, a young physician named Petrov was assigned to conduct a routine assessment of the body's condition. He was 29 years old, healthy, with no reported history of psychological instability. He entered the examination chamber, approached the sarcophagus, and the senior technician present later described what happened next in a private letter discovered after his death. Petrov stood over the body, and then he stopped moving. He stood motionless for several minutes. When the technician touched his shoulder, he responded only with a whisper, which the technician leaned in to hear. Petrov said he opened his eyes. There were no pupils, only emptiness. Petrov was removed from the room. He did not recover his normal psychological function. He died 28 days later from causes his medical records described as acute neurological failure of indeterminate origin. He was 29 years old. A secondary examination of the body was attempted with mechanical instruments. A specialized drill designed to extract samples of bone tissue for analysis was brought into contact with the remains. The drill melted, not overheated. Melted, the metal of the drill head liquefying on contact. From the point of contact, according to the technician's account, a dark, viscous substance emerged. Not blood, not any biological fluid, but a black, acidic material that ate through the metal tray placed beneath the body to contain any samples. The tray was 2 centimeters of solid steel. The substance passed through it in under 4 minutes. The official reason given by the Soviet state for removing Stalin's body from the mausoleum in 1961 was political. De-Stalinization, the program of reforming the Soviet Union's image and distancing the party from the crimes of the Stalin era. Khrushchev had denounced Stalin at the 20th Party Congress in 1956. Removing his body from the national shrine was the symbolic completion of that process. This is historically accurate. It is also, according to the evidence accumulated from technical and security personnel, incomplete. The anomalies in the mausoleum had become unmanageable. Lenin's body was deteriorating in ways that the preservation team could not explain and could not halt as long as the proximity continued. The scratching from Stalin's sarcophagus had not stopped. The thermal anomaly had not resolved. And the body itself, examined now by multiple successive teams, each of whom had been chosen for their ideological reliability and scientific credentials, continued to register biological phenomena that no ideology and no scientific credential could explain. The decision to move the body was taken at the highest level. The operation was scheduled for the night of the 31st of October, 1961. The operation began, according to the account of a Kremlin guard who served that night and later gave testimony to an independent researcher, at exactly 2:47 in the morning. The body was removed from the sarcophagus and transported to a prepared grave at the base of the Kremlin wall The grave had been engineered under the supervision of a military construction team headed by an officer named Krasnov. The construction specifications were unusual. 1.5 meters of reinforced concrete was poured beneath the burial site before the body was placed. Around and above the concrete, lead plates were installed. Plates which, Krasnov confirmed to a colleague in a conversation recorded years later, bore markings of a non-standard character, geometric symbols that he was told had been sourced from specialist consultation and that he did not recognize as belonging to any engineering or architectural tradition he knew. When that colleague asked Krasnov what they were building, Krasnov thought for a moment before answering. Then he said, "We were not building a tomb. We were building a cage." In the late 1970s, under the direction of Yuri Andropov, then head of the KGB and a man whose intelligence background gave him access to the Soviet Union's most deeply buried institutional secrets, a systematic operation was conducted to locate, consolidate, and destroy all surviving documentation related to the events of 1953. The operation was thorough. It reached into military archives, medical archives, regional security files, and the private collections of individuals who had been involved in the events of that year. Among the materials confiscated was a photograph, described in the confiscation log by the officer who retrieved it, before the log itself was subsequently destroyed, as an image of crystalline formations in a biological sample arranged in a geometric structure of consistent and apparently non-random design. The officer's marginal note on the log, which survived in a secondary copy, read, "They were building themselves a body." A separate thread of investigation led Andropov's researchers, operating under classification levels that did not officially exist, to a connection between the events of 1953 and a Soviet expedition conducted in 1936 to the Tibetan Plateau. The expedition, designated Operation Agartha in internal documents, had made contact with monasteries in a region that Soviet intelligence had been monitoring since the early 1920s. Among the materials recovered from the expedition was documentation of a ritual practice described in the research notes as exchange of life for power, a formal compact operating over a defined period in which extraordinary authority over other human beings was provided in exchange for something that the notes described only as the occupant. The duration specified in the ritual documentation was 21 years. 1932 was the year in which Stalin's consolidation of absolute personal power over the Soviet state was effectively completed. The year in which all meaningful opposition within the party had been eliminated, and his authority became, in practice, total. 1932 plus 21 equals 1953, the year of death. Andropov recorded his assessment of this material in a personal notation that was found inserted into an unrelated file in a regional archive in the early 2000s by a researcher who recognized its significance. The notation read, "For 21 years, the Soviet Union was not entirely governed by a human being. Laboratory number 7, the facility whose personnel had attended both the autopsy and the embalming, and whose institutional identity had never been established in any public record, was formally dissolved in 1982. The building that had housed it was demolished within the same year. The personnel were scattered to postings across the Soviet Union in a pattern designed to prevent them from maintaining contact with one another. No retirement records, no pension files, and no subsequent biographical traces have been found for any of the facility's identified staff members." The grave at the base of the Kremlin wall is guarded around the clock. This is not unusual in itself. The Kremlin necropolis contains the remains of numerous significant Soviet figures. What is unusual is the nature and consistency of the guard, a continuous, unbroken presence at all hours in all weather, maintained at a level of attentiveness that security professionals who have observed it describe as categorically different from the attention given to the other graves in the same row. In 2015, workers conducting general maintenance on the Kremlin wall perimeter received written instructions specifying, among other things, that certain areas of the wall base were not to be touched, adjusted, or inspected without authorization from a committee whose name was not printed on the instruction sheet. The area marked on the attached plan corresponded precisely to the burial site. In 2018, a geological survey team conducting subsurface analysis of the Red Square area, work officially related to infrastructure assessment, detected at the location of the grave a magnetic anomaly of a character the team's instruments were not calibrated to classify. The anomaly was localized, consistent, and not attributable to any known construction material or geological feature. The survey was discontinued after 2 days. The team's findings were not published. The team leader, in a private communication to a colleague, described the anomaly as something that should not be there and that we were told very clearly not to discuss. In 2003, a sealed document deposited in a Soviet-era institutional archive was opened, following the expiration of its classified status. The document was a personal notation by academician Ilyin, dated 1979, addressed to no recipient, a private record written for himself or for whoever came after. The notation read, "The seals hold for 70 years. After that, unknown." 1932 plus 70 equals 2002. The seal's lifespan, by Ilyin's calculation, expired 23 years ago. In March of 2023, a security officer conducting his rotation at the grave site filed an incident report, a report that was processed, logged, and then removed from the standard file system within 48 hours of submission. A copy was preserved by the officer's supervisor, who retained it for reasons he later described as instinctive. The report described at the burial location at 2:47 in the morning, a red pulsing light, rhythmic and slow, visible through the gaps between the stone memorial plaques. The light, the officer noted, pulsed with the regularity of a heartbeat. The official history is complete. The man died. The body was displayed. The body was moved. The man was denounced, rehabilitated in partial measure, and assigned to the category of historical figures whose legacy remains, in the language of modern Russian official culture, complex. But the concrete is still there, 1.5 meters of it, poured beneath the burial site in the dark. On the 31st of October, 1961, the lead plates with their unidentified symbols are still there. The guard is still there every night without exception. The seals that Ilyin described, whatever they were, wherever their logic came from, whatever tradition of knowledge informed the hands that drew those symbols on Georgian ecclesiastical manuscripts and Tibetan expedition reports and lead plates installed at 2:47 in the morning, have, by the only calculation that has been preserved in any surviving document, already expired. Ilyin wrote, after, unknown. The geological survey found something it could not name. The guard filed a report about a light that pulses like a heartbeat. And somewhere beneath the stone and the concrete and the lead, in the center of Moscow, beneath one of the most heavily monitored squares in the world, the question is not whether something is there. The question is simpler than that. Where is it now?